Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we explore the future and what this means for your leadership. We ask the big questions. What's happening on the horizon? What does this mean for us? And most importantly, what skills do I need now for leadership of the future? It's time to explore. Let's go.
Well, hello, it's Zoe, and welcome to the show. On Planet Human, sad news, irritating news, big news, I guess. $1.2 billion of the National Space Mission for Earth Observation program has been terminated. In fact, it was terminated in June by the Albanese government. This is a thumbs down, boo situation. The program was designed to help fund satellites for producing data on weather, GPS, natural disasters, finding out more about what's happening on the globe, and bye-bye, thank you very much. So the whole space economy and space programs are up in the air. So what does this mean for us? Well, I think it's pause for reflection about where our long-term thinking is at. What kind of world are we creating? What kind of resources do we need? What kind of information can we access with our latest technology? And I believe that space is a big part of that. Obviously, since I wrote the Olympus Project, the prequel Terra Blanca, and the sequel Olympus Bound. And I think it's a mistake to defund something so progressive. It's difficult. I totally get it. We have economic challenges that were brought on by COVID and all the expenses that came out with COVID and the squashed economy, etc. And yet, this kind of program rarely sees a profit immediately. It takes vision to invest in these types of things. So it's not an expense, it's an investment, and it is gone. So boo. I hope we can make it still work. There are some great, amazing space pioneers operating in Australia. So good luck, you guys. Keep the faith. Keep going. Well, my question for you today. Oh, hang on. Planet Zoe, where am I this week? This week, I am in Orange, New South Wales, which I just love the name of that town. It just makes me happy thinking about it. Orange, bright orange color. It's a happy place. It's got great food. It's a beautiful place. I'm heading there to work this week with the New South Wales DPI and a cohort of young farmers or farmers, entrepreneurs on the topic of risk and resilience. So doing some strategy work with these up-and-coming keen beans who have got a lot of big businesses to manage in very difficult circumstances. So we're talking about risk and resilience. Very cool stuff. So my question for you this week is teamwork. How do you save a sinking team? A sinking team. My guest this week is a fellow Canadian from none other than Saskatoon, which is a very small town in Western Canada in Saskatchewan. I grew up in Winnipeg. The towns are very similar, so we have a very common background. And my guest's name is Adrian Baillargeon. Adrian has a huge amount of experience in corporate corporate organizations around the world, in Canada, Africa, and now in Australia. He's worked extensively in marketing, sales, and strategy, and joint venture management. So he's been involved with all sorts of things like transformations, mergers, downsizing, expansion. And he's received a number of state, national, and global awards. And he's got a new book out as well that we will talk about. We have a great time discussing teams. I love teams. I love people stuff. So it's a ripper. Did that come out okay as a Canadian saying ripper? Anyway, it's good stuff. And without further ado, here's Adrian. All the way from Melbourne, it's a man from Saskatoon. Welcome to the show, Adrian Baillargeon.
Hey Zoe, it's great to be here.
Yeah, so everybody's got a treat today. 2 Canadians for the price of one in the room.
How good is that?
Yeah, it's awesome. So we were just having a conversation about my origin story and what brought me to Australia. But tell us about yours. Like, how did you end up in Melbourne all the way from Saskatoon and the jumps in between?
Yes, well, just to give listeners some context who may not have been to Saskatoon, because there might be a couple.
Like everyone.
Come on, there's a couple. Anyways, we're very proud in Saskatoon. So Saskatoon is in Western Canada. To fly from Saskatoon to Melbourne, I think the least amount of time it took us as a family was somewhere around 29 hours. So that's usually including a couple stops.
Quick.
So that's not too bad. And the longest was 42. So
been there.
Yes, but so how did I end up here and doing what I'm doing? Yeah, grew up in Saskatoon, went to university there. I started my corporate career in finance and marketing, worked for ExxonMobil. My experience in the corporate space, my early career was, I'd say, a little bit naive. I'll give you an example. I was going through a project with ExxonMobil where we're closing a lot of rural farm fertilizer and fuel centers. So that, let's say there was 20 and we're closing them down to 4 of them. And there used to be 5 territory managers that managed them. Well, Adrian was a little naive in thinking that, well, if there's fewer of these fuel centers, they're probably not going to need as many territory managers. So when my role was made redundant, I had no idea. It took me completely by surprise. But it's just one of the many lessons you get in corporate. I think it was a good one at that stage. But yeah, and that just, I worked 20 years in corporate. My wife is from Australia, so I traveled out here on a holiday, made some friends here, went back home, came back for a second holiday, and it turns out the group that I originally met, they grew up with my wife, Nicole. They were friends since, prep, or in Saskatoon, as we say, kindergarten. So yeah, we lived in Canada for a couple of years, and then we came back here, and the plan was always 2 years in Canada, 2 years in Australia, and we'll make that decision where home will be. But I think in Saskatoon in the winters, it gets down to minus 20, minus 30 Celsius. So I think when we landed in Melbourne for the start of our 2-year test, I think probably 51% of the decision was made by Nicole and I. I think she had experienced the winter, that was enough, and she was back home, and that's where home was going to be for us.
Yeah, I get it. Like, I left Winnipeg, which is very similar to Saskatoon in both environment and temperature, like the minus 30s, brutal cold on the prairies. And I think I've been back, apart from the summers when I was at summer camp. I guess the last time I was visited, 1996, I visited once for a wedding in 2003. And so it's been 20 years since I've been back to Winnipeg. All my family left Winnipeg, so I don't have family back there. And you kind of got a triage when you're going from Australia to North America, which cities you're going to land in, as you know, because, the 29 plus to 42 travel experience, which is hellish. All right. So you married an Aussie and you settled here in Australia, and you had a really interesting corporate whirlwind experience. How did you get into this kind of work now, where you're an independent consultant, you're focused on teams?
I think there's a little bit of this, when people talk about their purpose, this is where mine came into play. I think ever since I was 18 or 19 years old, I loved leading. So at that stage when I was 18 or 19, I was coaching sports teams. Well, most people my age were playing sports still. I got into coaching youth sport. I can remember, this is a little cheesy, but I can remember being at a pub one night and a friend of mine brought me those Tony Robbins tapes, that would come like 10 of them in a booklet, and you'd pop them out of the plastic molding.
I've got those.
Yeah. I'm not. There's something about who Tony Robbins appeals to, and look what we're doing now. But it really resonated with me. And as I went through my corporate career, I would do many leadership development programs and team development programs, and I found myself more fascinated with the content and what the facilitator was doing. And I thought, this is what I need to be doing. In 2011, I got some executive coaching accreditation. I did 3 levels of that. I started mapping out what a plan could look like. We then had our 3rd child. In my job, I got a new boss, so I got a new role. So a few things kind of, took me off my path at that stage, but eventually, 2017, I was at a stage where my kids were starting to get older. I would always ask them 2 questions. I would say, who do you believe in and what do you follow? And I'd say the answers are, who do you believe in? Yourself. And what do you follow? Your dreams. And the kids were getting at this stage where I felt like a hypocrite, because I knew deep down that I wasn't necessarily living those words. So I started to feel guilty. Now, the reality is my kids probably had no idea whether or not I was backing myself or following my dreams, but I definitely felt it. So I felt I had to make that jump. So after nearly 20 years working for some big brands across the world, decided to go out and start my own little brand, and now working with leadership teams, really about how to get leadership teams, how to strengthen the relationships and create better alignment so that they can achieve the results that they want and that they deserve.
That's an interesting point of view, that they deserve. What do you mean by why would they deserve the results?
Well, I just think it's a human. When you're focused on something, when you put in the efforts, there should be some kind of return from it.
Sometimes there isn't.
No, I don't. Well, maybe not right away, but there may be a return that we may not realize that is coming our way at one stage or the other. But I think everybody, for the most part, most leaders want to do a good job. They've got the right intent. Sometimes can get a little distracted, or the pressure is too much, and we make poor decisions. But ultimately, I think when people are focused and they've got the right intent and they're putting in the right effort, they do deserve to get some kind of positive return from that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And that would be a positive view of the world. That's for sure. I'm curious, what was it about leadership that you enjoyed so much?
In terms of leadership, what I enjoyed, I think of the great leaders that I had, and the really good ones I'm still in touch with. But what they ultimately did for me was create a sense of belonging. They made me feel that what I had to say mattered. The work that I was doing was meaningful. They invested time in me to teach me things. And ultimately, I think that's the role of a leader, is to create that sense of a belonging. Because when people feel like they belong, I think that enables them to be their best. And that's obviously, from a leadership perspective, that's what we want to get from our people, is if they're at their best, then we can achieve great things. So I think that was the bit that good leaders can create that sense of belonging, and bad behavior, not to say bad leaders, but poor decisions can actually create the opposite and make you question, what am I doing here? Do I actually have any value to add? Am I any good? Yeah, so I think that's kind of what fascinates me about leadership and what attracted me to it.
Yeah. As you were talking about leaders who help create that sense of belonging, I was doing cataloging of the leaders I've worked with when I was part of their team. I'm like, yeah, they did that really well. They did not. And it's an emotional thing, right? So that sense of belonging is a primitive, primal thing for us. And if that's lacking, it's really hard to feel like you want to put in the extra yard, or that it's a good place to be. And it's interesting how you followed that question of, is my work mattered? Am I any good? Like, sort of, if you don't feel like you belong and you don't feel like you're doing anything purposeful, then it kind of has a knock-on effect on your sense of self-esteem. Is that something that you experience as well? Like, when that social security is weak, does that affect how people perceive themselves as operators?
Absolutely. And if I relate this to teams, this is one of the indicators that an individual is in what I call a sinking team. So this is the worst type of team you can be in. But typically, the people in these teams, so this is where there's really poor relationships. There's no connection. There's no trust. It's just unproductive conflict. And there's a lack of alignment. Nobody really knows what the group is there to do, what they're trying to achieve. There's no agreed set of behaviors that are going to drive success. When alignment and relationships are poor, the sinking team is characterized by feelings of survival, like I'm just here day by day, right? I just want to get by the day and keep my job. And this is from a leadership perspective and people within the teams. The other things that are characterized in teams that are sinking, you typically see more sick days. You see mental health issues more apparent. And it's because there's this constant inner clash that people are having with themselves, going, I'm at work, nobody likes me, I'm finding I'm struggling to really connect with anybody. The work that I'm doing, does it really matter? I feel like I'm working hard, but I'm not making any progress. If you're ever sensing that at work on a consistent basis, that is a sign that your team is sinking. And I think then it goes back, it starts with a team, but it comes back to you as an individual. And, my book is called Teams That Swear. But I talk about in these teams, the swearing, who gets sworn about when you're in a sinking team and you have poor self-worth, you start swearing about yourself. I'm no freaking good. F me, what am I doing this time? So that connection to belonging, being part of a good team or a bad team, definitely the bad side of it, that does impact you at an individual level.
So if we're the leader and that's our team, and we know it's our team, because either we've inherited or some things have turned it topsy-turvy. What do? How do we bail it out? Is it possible to bail out a sinking team?
It's absolutely possible to bail out a sinking team. I actually think teams throughout the year go through different phases. Sometimes they're sinking, sometimes they're spinning, but it's the leaders that do the best job to make their team shine are the ones that put that intentional focus on how the team does work. So if you've got this sinking team, right, and some other characteristics are finger pointing. If people are talking about each other behind their backs, or they're waiting. If you're a leader, you might have, if you see these things, you might start to think, maybe I need to do something. If the people within the team are waiting for others to take the lead on things, or they're expecting the boss to be the one that does everything and makes all the decisions. You know what? A sign before COVID of a team that was sinking was that if people spent a lot of time on their phones in the parking lot, because they're probably talking to a recruiter going, I need to get a different job. It's a little bit harder to see that now with the hybrid working environment. But if any of those things you can relate to, here's what you do, is you start off first by creating alignment and clarity. And there's 4 areas that can help your team start to get out of that sinking phase. So it's about getting everybody on the same page about the purpose of the team. This is different than the purpose of the organization or an individual purpose. This is about going, how does our team specifically contribute to the broader objectives of the organization? So if the team can get alignment on that, and then talk about, well, what does good look like? Like if we're doing that really well, what are the things that we can say we're doing? So it's creating alignment on purpose. The other thing that you want to create alignment and clarify are roles and responsibilities. Because typically in these sinking teams, there's some overlap of work, or there's an assumption that, Zoe, you're going to be doing this, and then nobody does it, then we're in trouble because I made that assumption and you're probably making the same assumption about me. So the best teams to get out of that sinking phase will talk regularly. And I'm talking every 2 to 3 months, spend 10 minutes and going, right, Zoe, right now, what are your roles and responsibilities? What's black and white, yes and no? And what's the gray areas that you got? I'm not really sure if Adrian should be doing this or if Zoe should be doing that. But it's just being deliberate about that. Objectives is the third one that you want to create clarity for and alignment. If a team is sinking, I would recommend to a leader to create a team goal. So typically in corporate spaces, people will have their own KPIs, key performance indicators, something that measures the success of how they're doing their individual job. I would suggest creating a team goal, because if you look at, sport, everybody looks to sport about how teamwork works. That's because they've got a very clear goal. They're all working towards winning. In Australia, they're trying to win a flag. In Canada, they're trying to win the Stanley Cup, but they've got that one common goal. So it's about establishing that. So we've talked about purpose, roles and responsibilities, objectives. And the fourth thing, and this is I think the most important part, it's about agreeing and aligning on what are 2 or 3 key behaviors that for this group to work well together, that we're going to sign up to. What are the promises that we're going to make to each other? So I'll give you an example. I was working with a team, and the leader pretty much, when they told me all the problems, they just outlined what a sinking team looks like. One of the key characteristics of this team was that if somebody on the team had an issue, they would come and tell the leader, I've got an issue with this person over there. They're taking too long to get things done. And then she'd say, I swear, an hour later, the other person would come to me and say, whoa, that person over there is rushing things. They need to slow down. They're doing my head in. And this was happening constantly. So when I worked with the team, one of the team promises that they came up with was to say it sooner. And they used those words, and they said, if we have an issue, we are going to say things sooner. So all of a sudden they had common language, which made it easier for them to bring up an issue, right? Soon as someone said, if I said to you, hey, Zoe, I got to say something sooner, that prepared you for, Adrian's got something, he's got an issue that he needs to bring up. It's probably uncomfortable for him and it's uncomfortable for me, but we made that promise. So we had this common language. And then the second thing was what this team did was part of their team agendas. They met weekly, and what they did was agenda number 1 was who needs to say something sooner.
Oh, cool.
So it created this platform of safety to talk about something that people may not have been totally comfortable with. So going back to the original question, how do we get teams out of sinking, is really work on that alignment and clarity piece. That will get you some momentum going.
Yeah, and think the last one that you talked about, the promises that we make to each other is really super important. And so many teams don't do that work, where they don't create agreed behaviors, agreed promises, and have that as a mantra. And certainly so many don't actually then follow up on it. They might have a facilitated half day. They come up with these promises, and then it's like, there's no psychological safety in the group. And then it was just something that was pushed out of them by the facilitator, and they don't live up to it. So it does take quite a lot of effort, as you say, to create that momentum. Like, it's not like just because you know your purpose and you have a goal and you've made these promises that things happen. So what do you think can actually keep the plate spinning after you do this groundwork?
Well, if there is one thing I know, Zoe, about when I'm working with leadership teams, it's this, is that complacency is costly. Right? No team is ever perfect. Hidden issues are always, like, there's always issues that are festering, but if they stay hidden, at some stage they're going to explode, and it's never pretty. So the key to keep the wheel spinning is actually to keep spinning the wheel. So it's being deliberate, because if you're deliberate about teamwork, it'll pay dividends. So it's about when you're part of a leadership team, typically when you're meeting or you're working on things, you're supposed to be working on bigger ticket items, looking above, not so much in the weeds of the doing. So the advice I give to leadership teams is going, which part of your agenda are you going to dedicate to how this team works? So something as simple as, if they're meeting, I don't know, let's say monthly, can they allocate 15 or 20 minutes of their meeting to revisiting the team purpose? That might be month one. Let's talk about our team purpose. Month two, the 20-minute topic might be, let's go over our roles and responsibilities. Month three might be, let's review our team objectives. Or if we don't have one, let's create one. Or the flip side is, like, let's actually share our own individual KPIs and objectives. Because most times you find they overlap, but people don't realize that because they keep them really close to their chest. Month four could be about behaviors, but you can see how there's a third of your year and you've already just put in 20 minutes. That's like 1.2% of a day, let alone of a month, that you're being really deliberate to keep, as you say, keep those wheels spinning.
So the title of your book is Team That Swears. Teams That Swear. I think I put the wrong S in my notes. A team that swears, or teams that swear.
Yep.
Can you explain that, please?
Yes. Well, here's something else. All teams swear, particularly Australian teams. There's a report done by Oral-B about 3 years ago, and they looked at how often they looked at potty mouths in Australia. And what they found is that on average, Australians swear about 7 times a day, and roughly 10% of the population admitted to swearing more than 20 times a day. So swearing can actually be good, and I'll tell you about that in a second, but it's how you swear that makes a difference, right? If you're swearing by each other, right? If you're swearing in a joke, if you're swearing to release stress, these are good ways of swearing, right? When people are swearing by each other and in front of each other, these teams can focus on growth. They can focus on growing the business, they can focus on growing their people and growing themselves. Typically, these teams influence more broadly than just their team. They might start influencing the business, or they might start influencing the industry, and people are lining up to be part of this team. Now, the flip side of teams that swear by each other are the teams that are swearing about each other or behind each other's back. The bad kind of swearing in teams is when it's in frustration about others or to others. These teams really struggle. There's finger pointing, there's lots of blame, there's navel gazing, the wheels are spinning. Typically, people are really tired in those teams because they spend a lot of their energy on the wrong things. They're either putting out fires, or they're having to mediate issues. So I like the swearing because people love talking about swearing. But there was a piece I talked about before about the benefits of swearing. I had a colleague who swore all the time. Not all the time, but like a lot, I thought. Being a Canadian boy, we don't do that unless you're in the dressing room.
Who are you talking about? Winnipeggers, we swear a lot.
Yeah.
I had to actually tone down my swearing when I arrived in Australia.
Did you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. It was like, they were like, geez, F-bomb here, this, that, and the other. I'm like, is that not a thing here? So it was the environment I was in. I had to moderate that. In fact, it's so funny because I have a colleague who's, she's a professional trainer. She has a consultancy business and she presents all the time. And she watched one of my videos and she said, I watched when you noticeably held back a swear word. I'm like, yeah, I know. I have to like go, and I was about to say, and carry on. So yeah, some Canadians swear, but obviously at Saskatoon, they're a bit more pure over there.
Well, maybe, yes. We'll go with that one. But it's interesting how like you hold back, because maybe after hearing this research, you might go, maybe it's all right. But there's some research that was done that showed swearing can improve your strength, like your physical strength. So maybe your trainer, this can be a strategy that they can share with their clients. That they did a piece of research where it's like they're doing some strength test, saying nothing. They had another group saying, okay, now say your favorite word. Then they did it again, but this time say your favorite swear word. And the group that would say their favorite swear word would do better. Probably more related to what we're talking about today was there's a piece of research done in Australia and New Zealand. So there's the connection to that swearing again. But what they wanted to do is they looked at a number of different teams in different industries and go, okay, what's the difference between the teams that perform well and the teams that don't? And what they found is the teams, and this is no surprise, this bit, the teams that perform better had higher levels of trust. But the researchers wanted to dig deeper. It's like, well, we know that, but what are the things that are happening that create that trust? And one of the observable actions that they could see in the teams that had higher levels of trust, that they could tangibly look and see, or in this case hear, was they were swearing more. There was more swearing in the teams that had higher levels of trust. And what the researchers conducted was when people feel like they can be themselves, they can drop their guards, then that makes other people feel the exact same way. So if someone, stubbed their toe, or they got a negative outcome and they're going, F me, what did I do here? That people going, right, this person feels comfortable being themselves, I feel the same way. So it's a fascinating insight into how swearing actually creates trust. Now, again, I don't know if this is my Saskatoon upbringing, but I'm not an advocate of swearing. I'm not going into workplaces and doing talks and workshops and saying, right, you want to get better levels of trust, just start dropping more F-bombs and all is good, and I can walk off the stage in 2 minutes and everybody's happy. But what it does demonstrate is that the more you can be yourself, you talked about, psychological safety, the more you can drop your guard, the more you can have real, honest conversations, the better off you will be and the better off your team will be.
I agree. And I think one of the key insights from what you've shared and from my experience is that context is everything. And where it's what expectations are. So, for example, on stage, as you mentioned, if you start dropping swears on stage in a professional setting, it's not the done thing. In fact, I asked a conference organizer for my last keynote, I said, is there anything that I should not be doing on stage that would not be good for this event? She goes, swearing. I'm like, okay.
They've obviously been scarred by a previous speaker.
I don't know, but it was like, there's that message again. And I actually had a piece of feedback early on in my professional career when I did a presentation at a conference, and I must have sworn or something, because that's one of the pieces of feedback. It's unprofessional to swear on stage. I'm like, okay then. Got to rein in that little Canadian influence. And so the point is, like, some context not appropriate. But what you're talking about, when we're around people that we're working with day to day and we're trying to problem solve together, create something together, if we feel safe and comfortable and the norm is there, then that fully unfettered or unfiltered self-expression can be there. Now, for some people, swearing is incredibly offensive. So it also depends on who else is on your team. So there's an element of that. So, but back to the key point, right? So a team that swears by each other is the key premise of your book. So how do we get people from a sinking team into what's the top level team that you have in your model?
It's the shining team. So
shining, yeah.
Yeah, the shining is when the relationships are really strong and there's a high level of clarity and alignment.
Yeah, so that's the two axes on your model. So we've got clarity and relationships. So clarity of purpose and roles and responsibilities, and relationships that are solid and trusting. Did I analyze that correctly?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I think with the relationships, it's all about having that strong connection, which leads to trust. It's about psychological safety, as you mentioned before, Zoe. And then if you've got connection, trust, and safety, what that does is unlock the possibility and the opportunity to use feedback and conflict to do good. Feedback is often something that, is feared, because our brain interprets it as you're not good enough. And then if our brain is interpreting that we're not good enough. There's this risk of social exclusion. Then if we're excluded, then we're not going to be able to eat. We're not going to be able to survive. This is how our brain will work when we get feedback that might suggest that we're not being good enough. But if it's coming in a safe environment, if it's coming from people that we trust and that we understand that they're there to help us, then it can actually be used really well. Joe Madden, this is probably more for the Canadian listeners, but any Aussie baseball fans out there would recognize this name as well. Joe Madden was the manager of the Chicago Cubs when they won the World Series, I'm going to say in the last 8 to 10 years, but it was the first time they'd won in 108 years. And Joe talks about how he would communicate with his players. And he goes, look, if I've got a player who's not quite up to par, they're not a very good hitter or they're not a good fielder, whatever it might be. He goes, I'd rather tell them that right away. And I risk that they won't like me for a couple days, but I can live with that because if I don't tell them that they're not a very good hitter, they're not a very good fielder, they're going to get cut from my team. They're going to go to another team. They're going to get cut. And then they're going to go to another team. And then their career won't be able to flourish or even get off the ground. And if that player knew that that's the way I felt, they'll probably not like me forever because had I shared that with them, they could have done something about it. But instead, I could have left them just keep going on and making the same mistake. So he goes, I prefer to risk they don't like me for 2 days than for the rest of their life or my life.
You're so right. Like, I was thinking about that. Some of the most valuable feedback I've had, let's say from my feedback on my writing, has been the stuff that felt really painful to receive. And I'm like, I had no idea. I had to go and Google one piece. I'm like, what does that actually mean? Like they're giving me feedback about tone and approach. And I'm like, right. Well, great. This is a skill level I didn't know anything about. Now I can work on that. And it's smarts because you think I did the best I could, but there's always room to grow and develop, which is terrific. So that's the role of feedback. And if we can lean into that, that's actually advanced emotional intelligence and advanced leadership maturity is being able to seek out feedback as a natural part of the growth process. So that's really useful. Okay. So I have a big question about CEO working with a board and a chair that's not good. Let's hold that and let's go to the fast five. Are you ready, Adrian?
Okay. Now, how fast do you want me to be here?
Well, not that fast because I'll probably make a comment. It's like fast-ish five. Maybe I should have called the fast-ish five. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Number one, what is the future technology you most want right now?
I would love for there to be some kind of chip that you could put in somebody's ear. And when they want to say something, but they're afraid to say it and they hold back, their ear would start to wiggle because it could be either a reminder for them to go, man, I need to say this because it's obvious because my ear is wiggling and I should say it. Or it might be like a little bit of a social nuance that other people would see their ear wiggling and go, hey, Zoe, your ear is wriggling. What else do you think here? There's something you're holding back.
Oh,
I just think it would help us get more ideas and take away that fear within a team.
Yeah, okay. Like a biofeedback prompter for nervousness and apprehension. I love it. Okay.
Oh, we've got a name for it already. I love it.
Okay, number two. Best tip you ever got for leadership?
Outside of the Joe Madden advice around feedback, I had a leader, it wasn't necessarily what they said, but the very first time we had a meal together at lunch, he ordered all the food and put it in the middle, and it was like we were having dinner with family. And right away I thought, ooh, I like this. It just created a different environment. It felt like they valued me, that I was important to them. And it's something that I've done with my teams ever since. It's like, all right, just tell us what everybody likes. We'll put the food in the middle. It's just like we're having dinner at the family table. Okay,
interesting. That works well if the dietaries aren't too horrible.
It's probably got a little more complicated since then. But again, you can poll the group to say, is there anything specific we want to get? But the concept of breaking bread together can help create that connection and that trust and that safety amongst the group.
Got it. Nice. All right, number three. What's one problem at work or in workplaces you'd love to wave a magic wand and be fixed right now?
The commute. I'd like a transporter to be able to just press the button and bang, I can appear there. Because I think we get more people back in the office and in face-to-face environments. The other thing I would love, and I don't know if it's necessarily a magic wand, it might be a pill, but it's you take that pill and you feel that sense of belonging. Because I just think if you can take that and you feel like that every day, man, you just achieve amazing things.
I like it. Bit of oxytocin, the oxytocin love pill. All right, number 4, thumbs up or thumbs down. Who's a leader that's doing something right and deserves a thumbs up, or a leader that's doing something pretty terrible and they get a thumbs down?
Probably one of the leaders that I would give a thumbs up to is Stacey Marinkovich. So she's the coach of the Diamonds, the Aussie national netball team. When she took on the role as the head coach of the national program, she was the youngest coach ever to get that role. I wasn't surprised. She's got a very high level of humility and this desire to learn. There was no ego. And she backed herself. When she came on as coach, she brought the team together. Everybody's going, right, who's going to be the captain? Is it the previous captain? Is it going to be somebody new? What's Stacey going to do? And what she did, it actually created a little bit of negative press or something, question and saying, how can a brand new coach do this? She didn't name a captain. She said, we've got 10 or 11 or 12 of the best players in the country. Every single person on this team is a leader. So it kind of set the expectation for her team that I expect all of you to lead. And if everybody looks at themselves as a leader, then they're going to get a better outcome on the court and off the court. So I love that. I thought it was really good, and it was really brave because she was new, she was young. They questioned why would they bring in somebody with not very much experience, but she stuck to her guns and has done a phenomenal job. And
there's still no captain?
I think they moved the team down the track, decided that that's what they wanted, like it was a joint decision. But again, a great example of, where it's going, this is where we are right now in the context of where we're at. But it doesn't mean that things can't change. And I think it takes a great leader to recognize, well, actually, maybe we do need to evolve. Maybe I need to initiate it, or if that's the feedback that I'm getting back, I don't necessarily need to hang on to what my idea is. This concept of intellectual humility that other people can be right. There's other ways to do things than just my way. It's a good example of that coming to life.
Okay, cool. All right, number 5, what's your favorite leadership book or podcast?
Well, outside of this podcast, and let's say outside of Teams That Swear in terms of books, I love The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. He builds off the work of a guy from the mid-'80s named James Carse, but they talk about a concept that in life we play different games. We play a finite game, like a sporting game, right? There's a start, there's an end, there's a clear set of rules, and there's a winner and there's a loser, versus what Carse called an infinite game. And the infinite game is something that you're playing all the time. The intent is to keep the game going. You don't necessarily know the players. There might be new players come in. There may not be any rules, or the rules might change. And both of those thought leaders talk about that kind of mindset is required in business, that you need to be thinking about the bigger picture. It's not just about hitting that quarterly target or that monthly, hitting your results so you hit your share price and your stakeholders are happy. And for leaders, I think they talk a lot about it in business, but I think from a leadership perspective, you can think about your finite game. I need to hit my KPIs. I need to impress this leader. I need to get this promotion. But I think if you think about your legacy or what you want to be famous for, that's actually an infinite game that you're constantly working on. So I want to write a book about winning because I think that word invokes different emotions and understandings. And I loved how Sinek has articulated that there's different ways, there's different definitions of winning. And each type of winning or game you play requires a different mindset. So it's a little bit of a work in process. My favorite podcast, again, outside of this one, Zoe, the High Performance Podcast. A couple of guys from the UK. I think they're famous in sport. I don't know their background at all, but they always bring in some fascinating speakers. They started out with just bringing in, I think, a lot of soccer players from Europe, but then they brought different sporting, and now they're bringing in people from corporate, people just from all different backgrounds. And I would say 9 out of 10 of those podcasts I could listen to 3 times because there's so many messages to take away.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for those recommendations. And that was the Fast 5. The Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast is proudly sponsored by the Amplifiers Academy. It is an online self-paced leadership development program that you can join at any time and progress at your pace. There are very short video lessons, great checklists and resources and recommendations and book summaries all there to help boost your leadership thinking and abilities. We focus on leading strategy, leading culture, leading change, and leading performance. So if you want a go-to resource that can help boost your strategic abilities immediately, check us out, Amplifiers Academy, on the zoerouth.com website. See you there. All right, Adrian. So last big meaty question. Right. So a CEO, they're working with a board and a chair, and the board and chair, terrible leaders. They're bullish. They don't listen well. They're micromanagers. So how do we deal with that? Whether it's a CEO dealing with a board, so the CEO doesn't have complete autonomy and responsibility over the board, it can be replicated, whether it's a senior executive with a poor CEO, same sort of thing. So how can we make a difference? What can we do if we're not the person with authority? How can we make a shift?
It is a fascinating context, boards, chairs, and CEOs. I've done some work with boards and the CEO to create that alignment, and it's amazing. Often you'll see, I think the CEO gripes would be around, you're getting into the nitty gritty. You're getting into detail that actually that's not your job. That's my job, is to deliver on what the strategy is and the vision. And board members, I think at times, depending on their experience as well, struggle to understand their role. They may come in with a certain level of expertise and they go, that's what I'm here to do, is provide direction. And, I've got marketing background, so I've noticed this with your marketing activity. It's not working. It's like, we need them to lift up a little bit. But I look at that dynamic, and it's similar to the thinking that Patrick Lencioni had from 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. In the book, one of the main concepts he talks about is Team 1 and Team 2. So as a leader, Lencioni would suggest that you're actually part of more than one team. You're leading the team that report into you. So that might be if you're your function, your department, or in the case of a CEO of the business, that's one role you play. But the second role you play, you're actually a team member of another team. So I have to see this with C-suite, right? You've got the CEO and you've got the chief growth officer. And if I talk to the growth officer, I say, right, tell me about your team. They immediately talk about the team that reports into them.
Of course. Yeah.
Right? And I go, what about the other team? They go, what do you mean? Well, what about the team that you're on? Oh, I hadn't really thought about that. But the point I'm trying to make here is that when you're part of 2 different teams, it's A, you have to recognize it, and 2, you have to understand what the role of each team is. So if you're the chief growth officer, the team you're leading, your job is to grow the business. We'll simplify it. But if you're also part of the executive C-suite, your job is to lead the business. And so if you're on the leadership team, your team 1 is the leadership team, and team 2 is the team that you lead. It is so easy to just focus or over-index on the team 2, the team that you lead, because it's what you know. You've probably recruited the people into that team because you like them and they're good. You probably are similar types of personalities. You got salespeople or marketing or risk. They're probably similar personalities and types. So it's much easier to want to spend more time. And also, that team typically is a reflection. People will see it as a reflection of their worth. If my team's performing good, that means I'm a good leader. So I think when looking at the CEOs and the board, if they can look at themselves as a team, it starts with looking at what is the role that this group, and that includes the CEO, that includes the board, that includes the chair. If they start to look at themselves as a team, that could change the way how they interact and start to work together. If you're in a CEO and you're in that situation where maybe the board and the chair, they don't see each other that way, my advice is start with the chairperson and start to create alignment with them. Really get to a point where you can agree on, okay, what's the purpose of our group? What is the role of the board and the responsibilities? What are the things that we're trying to achieve as a board group? If you can start to get that alignment amongst the group, it then puts the CEO, and I would suggest a good chair or board members, just pull people back to what was agreed if they start to go down a little bit of a different track, a little bit lower level than they need to be. So it's about, but again, starting with the chair. I was working with one CEO, and they said that's actually one of the biggest challenges that he was facing, is because to develop a strong relationship, time is needed. And boards and CEOs don't necessarily spend a lot of time together. They most likely spend zero social time together, let alone meeting on a regular basis outside of just real talking work. So that's where putting that real emphasis with the chair, if you can create that alignment, then the chair can expand, like influence more broadly, and you start to develop a deeper relationship with that individual.
Yeah, that's great. So it's really the pattern that you talked about from the beginning, where it's about creating the alignment and building relationships, and that applies in whatever context. So whether you have positional authority or not, you can still start with those incremental foundations and just raising the issues. That's fabulous.
It's easy, isn't it? Like
easy. I'd say it's simple, but it's not necessarily easy. Yeah. Adrian, so you said you've got a special gift to listeners. Can you tell us more about that and where people can find out more about you and your work?
Yeah. So to find out more about me, you can visit adrianthecanadian.com.
That's your website, Adrian the Canadian?
I use that URL because Baillargeon, nobody can spell Baillargeon. So if they go to Google Adrian Baillargeon, you can't find it. So I've got both, but Adrian the Canadian just redirects to Adrian Baillargeon. So
that's great.
So that's really simple and easy. So you can visit there. I'd also love to offer your listeners a copy of Teams That Swear. So if anybody wants a digital version of Teams That Swear by each other, not about each other, if you head to teamsthatswear.com and you use you go in, pick the digital book, and use the coupon code Swear by Zoe, and it's ZOE. You don't have to put the 2 dots on there because I don't know how to do that on my computer, but just Swear by Zoe, ZOE. It'll knock the price off the book, and you'll get that delivered into your inbox within 48 hours.
Okay, cool. And let's put a caveat on that. That offer may not exist forever. So if you're interested in the book Teams That Swear, make sure you get it done in case you miss out. All right. Adrian, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was lovely to share the space with a fellow Canuck, especially a fellow Canuck from the prairies.
Yes.
It's nice to hear the accent. Woohoo. And yeah, who won the Stanley Cup last year?
Oh, the Vegas, the Knights.
Oh, Vegas, American team. Oh.
Yes, yeah. I think the last Canadian team was the Montreal Canadiens in 1993. So,
oh my God, was it that long ago? That's crazy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in the meantime, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been awesome.
Right on, Zoe. I've loved it. Thanks for having me.
So talking about teams is one of my favorite topics. I've spent a lot of time in teams, leading teams, especially out in the bush. And I'm fascinated by the dynamics that work and don't work when humans come together and try and do stuff together. So the key takeaways from my conversation with Adrian for me are the focus on alignment and relationships. So getting clarity around your purpose and the goals that you want to achieve as a collective, and then working on the relationships, how you connect and understand each other is pretty critical. And I love the question that he uses is what does good look like? And that brings it back to something substantive and tangible that we could all work towards. I think that's really awesome. In terms of the tip of the week from one of my books, I pulled out off the shelf Loyalty, my third book, Stop Unwanted Staff Turnover, Boost Engagement, and Create Lifelong Advocates, and turned to the chapter or the section on touch points of how people engage. And this is on page 67. And it's about the daily gathering or weekly gathering. So this regular cadence of engagement, a regular rhythm of engagement. And here's a sample agenda. And all of the agendas, whether it's daily, weekly, quarterly, or yearly, have 4 similar topics: people, process, progress, experiences. So for your daily stand-up or weekly stand-up, here is a sample agenda of no more than 30 minutes. And under people, have a round robin, one person at a time, of individual wins, challenges, and or weekly deadlines. For process, roadblock removal. You can ask what needs clarifying, what needs streamlining, come with questions or solutions. Progress could be review the dashboard or activity roadmap of your choice to mark progress for the week and celebrate milestones. And to finish is thumbs up or thumbs down on enthusiasm for the week, or do a rating of 1 to 10 on morale. follow up with individuals if there is negative feedback. So my husband and his team, they use a shorthand for all of this. They give a well-being rating of 1 to 10. How are you doing with that? Are there any red flags that people need to be mindful of? And I think that's everything. Oh, busyness level. They give busyness level 1 to 10. So that's another way of running your daily stand-up. So yeah, busyness level 1 to 10, your well-being level 1 to 10, and any red flags that need following up. Okay, so that is your tip of the week. Coming up next on the show, next week we've got a solo-sode, and I'll be taking a bigger, deeper dive on performance and leading performance, some key takeaways from the Amplifiers program in there for you so you can take action and lead a stellar performance and get the results you deserve, as Adrian said. So as I leave you for this week, I would love if you rated and reviewed the podcast. We would love to get some testimonials on the platform of your choice or on any of our social media sites. If you're on LinkedIn, you can leave me a review as a podcast host. That would also be awesome. It's good karma for you. If you're getting lots of useful information and practical advice from the show, it's free to you. It means a world to me if you leave me some feedback. That would be awesome. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. To find out more about leadership of the future or to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.